Let's figure out what are the intricacies involved in this process called financial planning, which is so important to create long-term wealth and create emotional security for us as to who is going to take care of our economic needs once we retire, who is going to take care of our dreams, not just for ourselves, but for our children as well. So the whole objective is to build an investment portfolio that's worth having. This is Anurag. So in terms of my credos, I've done a 1-year MBA from IIM Ahmedabad, and I've cleared my chartered accountancy exams with rank 22 and 25 in CA final at IPCC, and I'm a graduate from St. Xavier's, Calcutta. So navigating through the content, we are going to understand broadly the philosophy behind investing and then look at specific options. So this is the financial pyramid, where what you need to do is to understand about your goals and how your investment should take you. From example, you want a particular net worth, you want a cash flow, you want a risk tolerance, you want an emergency fund, and so forth. So that's really very important when it comes to understanding. So in terms of the basics, everyone is going to have different financial goals at different points of time in his or her life, ranging from marriage to a new job, having children, children's marriage, and then children's education, and then retirement. So at different points of time, the goalposts are going to keep changing, and it's imperative that you understand whether you are heading in the right direction. So from the time that you were a kid, did you act or dress the same way as you are doing today? No, you don't. As time passes, so does our life. We change. Our investment philosophy, therefore, will also need to change appropriately with the passage of time. So in terms of what are the factors that investment is determined by, it's going to be broadly determined by 4 factors. 1, your income. How much are you actually earning? The other is age. At what age are you now? Because that is a crucial determinant of your risk appetite in terms of what is your savings objective. And then yes, the broader market. So for example, today Nifty being on a bull run, one would be very circumspect about whether one should go full on the markets or stay on cash or use a debt fund, whatever. So the external market trends and the macroeconomic factors are going to be a huge determinant in understanding how we should plan our investment portfolio. So in terms of this is like someone who is a parent vis-a-vis someone who is a retired. So the philosophy changes, because once you are a parent, you have financial dependence on yourself. You're going to have high expenses and less savings because there's a school fees, a tuition fees, a carpool fees. You've got a lower risk appetite because now you've got kids, and then you need to plan in advance. So then you can invest 30% of your earnings, assuming, and the investment instruments that are going to be available would be like health insurance, ULIP, gold, life insurance, and child plans. When you move to the retired stage of your life, the idea here is to now reap rewards from your investments, and you need liquid funds now for expenses. You really can't go long on too many investment portfolios. Your risk factor becomes extremely low, and your investment horizon being very short term, so would be the duration of the investments that you are working. So here you can invest 20% of your earnings, and the instruments are strictly going to be very low risk ones: pension plans, fixed deposits, senior citizen savings, and so forth. And if you are a bachelor, it's going to be no financial dependence, age is not a concern, and you've got a very high risk appetite, and accordingly you can take a very long-term view of your investments, thus investing 60 to 70% of your earnings in instruments like bonds, mutual funds, life insurance, stocks, direct equity exposure, ULIP and PPF. And post marriage, that's the stage before you have kids, you can still invest like 30 to 50% of your investments of your earnings and into instruments like debt, real estate, as well as equities or mutual funds. Now, more than the past, I'm actually interested in the future, since that's where I intend to spend the rest of my life. And therefore, irrespective of whether or not you followed a prudent investment strategy so far, the idea is to recalibrate your thoughts around this very notion of investing, and I'll give you some inputs in this regard. So how does a budget affect saving? So you can have a particular income, and since you are a big spender, you will spend a huge component of that income and save less. And someone who's high on the savings matrix will prefer spending less and saving more. So you will need to understand as to where on this savings preference do you stand. Inflation is going to be a huge determinant. So there is this concept of real return on fixed income securities, wherein if you've got a bond which pays like 8.5% interest rate and inflation is 7.5%, so you are actually earning only the delta, that is 8.5 minus 7.5, that's just 1% post inflation. So you would eventually actually literally get poorer in course of time. So your investment strategy needs to take care of investments in such a way that you will really need to beat inflation big time across all time horizons of your life, starting from a bachelor to a parent to an old age. So money saved is money earned. So I would highly recommend that you do have a preference towards savings. What are the money making tips? You can always try to save 30% or more of your earnings, and first try to satisfy yourself that you've not earned that 30% money. Only then you will be able to save money. So just imagine that in case you are earning 1 lakh per annum, think that it's going to be only 70,000 that you can actually spend, and 30,000 will strictly go into investments. Pay yourself first. So savings is your first source of capital. Pay yourself and then spend the rest. 70-30 rule is something that becomes very pertinent here. Of your active income, 70% should fund your needs and living expenses, and 30% should be used to build your wealth. So this refers to the earned income which you are earning on a month-to-month basis, like a salary or a professional fee that you are earning. And your passive income, which is your unearned income, which could be some inherited property that you have which yields a monthly rental, or some trade and business activities in which you do not materially participate. Here I think you can actually spend nothing out of it and invest the whole quantum into savings. So then understand that you will have to have a personal budget where you have got a net income, save 30% of that. So that's the net spendable income, and net that from various expenses, and you've got some residual income. Now coming to the first instrument that you have in terms of whether you should buy or rent a house, it's very interesting because this is one of the biggest questions that I face from various participants of my workshops, whether one should go for rent or one should buy a house. So the factor that one needs to consider in this regard is what is the potential of capital appreciation in that particular segment. So in case you are thinking of buying a flat in an area where a metro is coming up, or in a city like Bombay where real estates never see south, that is something very important. So in the area that I stay in, Lilwa in Kolkata, real estate prices have been literally stagnant for the last 5 years. So then that becomes something that one needs to very critically think about. So the city of residence, is it your hometown? Is it a city where you've been posted only for the next 3 years? And then you need to then make a trade-off between whether you want to pay a rising rental every 11 months or you want to pay fixed EMIs buying a particular flat. Because some people take a view that they are going to, let's say, stay in Mumbai for the rest of their lives in case they are into corporate finance, and therefore that would become an important decision. So an immovable asset owned must be utilized and not a better option of investment unless a person has enough surplus. And it should be based on the ratio of return of rent versus value of assets, so which is typically called rental yields. This in tier 1 cities surprisingly will be less than 2% or 3% at the max. So if you've got a flat which is like 1 crores in terms of cost, your annual rent from that will be like 3 lakh rupees, 25,000 per month. So a low ratio would indicate that the asset is actually overpriced and the probability of appreciation of the asset value is less. So this is something which is typical to Bombay. You will never have real estate rentals in terms of rents, yields, not ever beyond 3% in most cases. So in Powai, a 2 BHK flat that costs at least 2 crores and rent per month is 30,000, which makes it 3.6 lakhs per annum. So the ratio of rent to asset value is less than 2%, which is like 1.8%. 8% risk-free return is 16 lakhs. Post-tax yield is 9.7 lakhs per annum. So then you would prefer to take a flat on rent and invest the surplus. This leads to a low demand for purchasing a flat, and then price of the flat will fall because most people will then say, okay, it's better for me to take this particular flat on rent and then invest that money of 2 crore rupees into the markets where I can at least earn 8% per annum. In fact, 8% you do not even invest in the markets. You will just invest in some debt instrument, a liquid fund or a liquid plus or a gilt scheme. So that is something that will be interesting to watch out for. How much are you expected to pay upfront? How much is the EMI that you can afford? What are the tax benefits? So for example, the Narendra Modi government has come up with huge benefits in terms of the interest on housing loan that can be deducted from salary. What is the EMI date? Is it in sync with your monthly salary? How is the rate of interest calculated? Now that is something very, very crucial nowadays. Whether it's a fixed interest rate, whether it's floating. In case it's floating, does it get automatically adjusted? Or in case of my boss, one needs to go to HDFC Limited every time rate changes, pay a reset fee, and only then it gets changed. In some cases, it will be linked to MCLR, that is the marginal cost of lending for banks. In some cases, it's going to be linked to the base rate of SBI. So you need to be very cautious about this component in the housing loan decision. Insure your property and do not hesitate to switch. So a lot of times you might have a banker who is not willing to accommodate you in terms of flexibility on the interest rate front. Simply switch over the loan to a separate bank. So I know someone who's recently switched from an SBI, which was not willing to budge on the fixed interest rate, into Axis. So the bank to bank transfer happens in a very seamless manner of the entire loan, and you just end up paying lower EMIs on that same housing loan. Now let's look at insurance. Now insurance is something which will have some dimensions. That one, the main purpose of insurance is to provide protection against any unseen eventuality. So that can be either life insurance or it can be medical insurance. So life insurance is basically if I die, what is going to happen, and critical insurance, illness insurance, is basically the living death, where I have afflicted now a disease which is either cancer or a heart attack or a stroke, which involves massive hospitalization. So where do I get that? Typical medical insurance. Now insurance, so in case let's say my annual income is something like 10 lakhs per annum, my sum insured should be at least 1 crores to 1.2 crores. the insurance diversification should be made according to the availability of income. So I need to look at the pattern in which I'm going to earn the money, and in order to maintain the available cash flow, substantial part of the insurance should be made in term insurance. We in India have a huge fascination with this ROP where the return of premium happens, but trust me, take a plain vanilla term insurance and put the rest of the money into some equity mutual fund, you will end up making more money. So insurance should not be treated as a mode of investment, but rather a risk cover protection. So my father and I would be at loggerheads trying to make ourselves come to a common conclusion about this, but we've never had this consensus, because he is always a proponent of return of premium where he sees something coming back, and I want a plain term insurance, whether which is goes waste in case I still continue to be alive. And yeah, so that's how it is. Never mix insurance with investments would be my philosophy, because insurance is only for protection against risk and never to earn a return. Life insurance, take a term insurance policy at a very young age and make it at least 10 times of your annual salary, and prefer to avoid private players which offer cheap premiums. Now again, that is something which will need to be looked at, considering the claim to settlement ratio and which bucket of the claim who is better. So it is not an absolute claim to settlement ratio across all buckets. So there are some companies which have a better user experience in terms of low value claims, some companies which will have a better experience in terms of high value claims. So you will then have to see as to what is the kind of insurance that you are taking in terms of the coverage amount, and then you will have your players who are in the preferred player zone. Personal accident insurance, God forbid if anything happens to you, in case you die, lose a limb, eyes, ears. Health insurance, it should be with a renowned national carrier with a third party administrator who again works in a seamless manner to settle claims. And then asset insurance, which is like burglary, fire, floods, earthquake, and so forth. So someone who would have been based out of Chennai last year would have been very well off in case he or she would have taken an insurance on property. Now term plan, the basic feature is that it's just life cover for a limited period, next 10 years, and claim will be paid to my family in case something happens to me in terms of death within that insurance term. The cost and insurance premium which is collected, it's a low cost plan. Premium will be kept on being collected till the end of the insured term, and it is suitable for those individuals who are seeking complete risk insurance during a specific term with no element of savings or investment. So I will say, okay, my monthly income is almost like 80,000, which is like 10 lakhs per annum. So in case anything happens to me, my family, my near and dear ones get 10 times of that, which is a crore. And for that I will pay a specific sum of money as my annual insurance premium. It will again depend on whether I'm a smoker, I'm not a smoker, do I have a history of blood pressure, no, some pre-existing diseases, yes, no, and so forth. Whole life plan will be paid to the family of the death of the assured, irrespective of when it happens. So it is like a complete life insurance, complete life, not just the next 10 years or the next 20 years. Here the premium therefore will be slightly higher, and which will need to be continued to be paid till retirement or death of the individual. And it's for those individuals who seek complete risk cover during a specific term with no element of saving or investment. And then you come to the endowment plan, where the sum assured is paid to the family if the policyholder dies during the policy term, or if the policyholder survives the entire policy term. So even when you survive the term, you get this endowment plan. So this is kind of savings built into insurance in terms of bonus and profits along with the sum assured. Obviously, the premium here will be much higher than term plans, because part of the premium is used for the investment dimension of this decision of yours to generate profits or bonuses for you. And then you've got ULIP, which is a combination of a life insurance and a mutual fund. The return on maturity could vary depending on the performance of the underlying fund. and in case you die, your nominee receives the fund value or sum assured, whichever is higher. This is the most expensive of all plans because you have a huge component of the premium which is used to invest in a fund, and a part of it is used for the term insurance part. Few things that you need to remember here is that after you've decided on the right kind of insurance, do a comparative study of similar policies being offered by different companies and ensure that your premium amount and premium frequency is within your ability to pay. So in case you got an annual plan and you get your bonuses in your company around July or August, so that you should kind of try to keep in sync. Check with the insurance company on the additional benefits such as an accident rider, a critical illness rider, or maybe an option later to convert a term plan into a whole life plan, and read the fine print very carefully. So there should, each and everything in that whole insurance policy should be very clear. There should be no ifs and buts into the insurance coverage that you have. Get things very clear from the agent in case you are using the agent. Coming to healthcare cost, is now second only to real estate cost. So after rentals in Bombay, the highest expenditure that one would have would be in terms of medical cost. So you need to figure out whether you are actually adequately covered for such medical emergencies, and in case your company coverage is inadequate, because a lot of companies will end up giving you a 2 to 3 lakh rupees of a family coverage. Think of a top-up. Now that top-up can either be availed through the company itself, or you can go for an external concurrent medical coverage. So in case you are a chartered accountant, for example, the CA Institute has a tie-up with New India Insurance to give you medical coverage up to 10 lakh rupees. So while you might continue employment in any particular corporate house which gives you 2 to 3 lakh rupees of coverage, which will be first utilized, you can also take this parallel, because this is not contingent upon your staying or not staying in that company. And should you decide to move on, it's better that you have this parallel insurance policy also in place. Now, should I take cover individually or a group cover? So that is like 10 lakh rupees for the entire family or 3 lakh rupees for each of them. So this is a typical decision that one needs to arrive at. Mostly it will be a trade-off, and I think I would prefer the 10 lakh rupees for the family, because one does not expect that in a particular year you will have all 4 members of the family having some medical issues and each of them requiring to draw. So that kind of curtails the limit to 3 lakhs, but it is rather preferable that you have the overall limit of 10 lakhs without any sub-limits for individual members. Also understand whether what are the existing health ailments that will be covered, or what are the waiting periods in this regard. So companies will have very clear policies that for pre-existing diseases they are going to pay only after 4 years of continuous coverage. If that be the case, plan your strategy accordingly. The little monthly premiums will stand you in good stead en route to the hospital. So the little coins that you put in your piggy bag eventually help you a lot on those crucial days. It's just a pictorial depiction of the strategy. The wellness plan will be individual cover, family floaters, group insurance in case of companies, critical insurance policies where you take specific covers for cancer or for TB, or standalone policies. There will be unit linked health plans, hospital cash plans, and definite plans, benefit plans. Ideally, a plan should have some pre-existing condition waiting period, some family floaters, some lifetime renewability, and tax exemption. So just try to figure out what exactly is this. This is from the ICICI Lombard insurance information page. The important things that you need to remember here is the scope of coverage. When you are paying for a comprehensive cover, make sure that the risk covered is comprehensive as well. Don't end up buying a plan just because it's cheaper than the risk, because eventually if it's duds and you are not able to utilize that plan in case of an emergency, then what's the whole point? So even if the sum insured is the same, there will be other benefits that you will need to check. So some companies will have 2.5% of the policy amount as the sublimit for room rent, and accordingly everything will have a limit. 3 times of room rent, 10 times of room rent. Some companies will say they are not going to provide OPD cover, ambulance service. There is a huge difference when it comes to insurance against the existing diseases. So only after 4 continuous years, as I was saying, only then you will have a look at the existing diseases. Some will ask for upfront medical checkups, some will not. So when you are paying for a comprehensive cover, make sure that the risk covered is comprehensive as well. This is something that we've covered. And a good insurance investor advisor will offer you always a health plan when you are young and premiums are still low. Most of your insurance costs here will be incurred in your earlier part of the year, and you tend to enjoy the benefits when you actually start getting these expenditure requirements near retirement. So look at something that offers lifetime renewability. Also, this cashless is a very good thing. Every company will have tie-ups with specific hospitals. So the idea of paying upfront and then seeking reimbursement has its own challenges, because then your liquidity becomes a challenge, and then the whole idea of claiming the reimbursement from medical companies becomes cumbersome. So many people will say that it's better to go for that insurance company which promises the largest network of cashless hospitals for you, so that during an emergency your access to healthcare facility continues unabated. So that does not become a challenge, because you don't have 15 lakhs upfront to pay and then seek reimbursement. It is better. But yeah, hospitals will have 2 sets of charges, one for cash settlement and one is for claimless settlement. So you end up paying a higher amount for the same treatment in case you are opting for a cashless scheme. It is recommended that you purchase plan from insurance who guarantee not to charge additional premium on renewal in case a claim is made. So some will give you a no claim bonus, and some companies will say that the moment you make a claim, the next time you renew it, you will have to pay a higher premium. And so check these limits on room rents or ambulance charges or doctor's fees, daycare procedures, co-payment. So some companies will say that irrespective of whatever has happened, you will need to shell out 15% of the expenditure as a co-payment. Now that should not come to you as a shocker once you actually start using this thing. Buy your policy from a reliable insurance company with a high claim settlement ratio. Do not have any product where you got too many changes in the product since launch. And an in-house TPA helps insurance in reducing the TAT, that's the turnaround time. And for a family floater, make sure that the upper cap on the number of family members who can be insured suits your requirements. Now coming to investments. Investments will have 2 pedigrees essentially, one with a guaranteed return on investment and one with a non-guaranteed investment. The guaranteed component will be a fixed deposit, a post office scheme, a PPF, a PF. In terms of those instruments which do not guarantee you any specific return, you will either have equity, which again can be mutual fund, or a stock market, a direct exposure where you understand the market and you take exposures on specific stocks. So for example, I might want to go bullish on SBI or an L&T or a Reliance. Here I put it in a mutual fund which puts it into a basket of such securities. Now mutual fund again can be either a diversified equity fund which will put across asset categories in the insurance one, and some will be sectoral equity fund. So a Reliance banking fund or a Reliance pharma fund or a DSP BlackRock IT fund. So those are very theme-based funds. When you want to invest in gold, you can invest either in the physical bond or through mutual funds or gold ETF nowadays, or you can also invest in the newly issued Government of India gold bonds in commodities, again you can invest either directly or to the mutual fund route, and then you can also invest in real estate as well as ULIP. Now mutual fund, we have fixed income mutual funds, which is the debt part of it, which will put your money into guaranteed return instruments like NCDs or bonds or commercial papers, and so it will typically guarantee you a 6.5%, 7% return, which is fixed in nature. And some mutual funds will be a growth oriented thing where they will put money into risky stocks and take that risk in a calibrated manner to generate alpha for you. Bank FD, I think it's a no-brainer. It can range from 7 days up to 5 years or even 10 years depending on the bank, and that's okay. So you'll have different banks. The important thing to keep in mind here is that for every tenor, you will have a specific bank which will offer the highest rate of return because of their asset liability matching in their particular balance sheet. So one needs to be very careful about that if I want to have my FD for 3 years, there will be one specific bank which offers the highest rate of return for 3 years. That will not be the same bank which offers the highest rate of return for a tenor of 5 years. So for, let's say, this keeps dynamically changing, there will be some bank which will give an interest rate of, so let's say in the data that we have on July 2016, Ratnakar Bank was offering the highest rate of return for 5 years. For 3 years, some other bank would have been there. Then NSE. Now the idea of investment in NSE is that it will be eligible for investments under Section 80C of the Income Tax Act. Every year, the interest which accrues is also deemed to be reinvested, and therefore you can claim 80C benefits on that. The interest income is taxable, but there is no TDS on this. PPF, you can invest up to 1,50,000 per annum. You can actually take a loan also on the PPF account after completion of the 3rd year. There's a very clear-cut, rule-based loan eligibility that you have, and there's a deduction under 80C up to 1,50,000, assuming that you will have no other deductions into this. One very good thing about PPF is that the interest on PPF is completely tax-free. So that is something which will be a reason for you to invest a huge component of your 80C outlay into PPF. So I would rather imagine that apart from your company PF, VPF contribution that you have, which is like 12% of your basic salary, a good portion of that should go into PPF, because this is something with the compounding impact because of the lock-in for 15 years really returns a good corpus at the end of it. This interest rate keeps dynamically changing. You have to make a minimum contribution of 500 rupees per year, a maximum of 1,50,000 per year. You cannot have joint accounts. The maturity period is 15 years, which can again be extended in blocks of 5 years. You have 80C deduction. From the 7th year, you can start withdrawing, and you can take a loan from the 3rd year. And this amount of money which is there in your PPF will not be attached under any court or decree. So that is something which is very safe for you. Now coming to NPS, which was the recent initiative by the government. Now the idea of NPS is that your savings will be managed by the Pension Fund Regulatory and Development Authority of India, which in turn is going to have the mandates given to professional fund managers who are very good at managing these diverse portfolios, which will be a mix of government bonds, bills, corporate debentures and stock. Now the different thing is that you can either have a choice A, where you choose between an active choice where you decide that, okay boss, I will have X percentage into equity and 100 minus X into safe debt, or most people will want to offer the auto choice, which depending on your age bracket will automatically make that allocation for you. Now there is a tier 1 account, which is the non-withdrawal permanent retirement account, and tier 2 account is the voluntary withdrawal account, where Once you have an active tier 1 account, you can open this account and you can withdraw from this account as per the needs of the subscriber. What are the tax benefits? Up to 10% of your basic salary, which is basic plus DA, you get a complete tax deduction under 80CCD within the overall ceiling of 1 lakh, which is your own contribution. And the employer's benefit, the employer's part of it, is exempt under 80CCE completely up to a limit of 1 lakh. So in both cases, you have a substantial component which you earn tax benefits on. So if in case you are investing 50,000 in NPS, you effectively are investing only 35,000 because you have saved 15,000 rupees upfront at year 0. So your IRR on that investment will become significantly higher. Then you can have a ULIP, which is basically a combination of insurance and investment. We've covered that earlier. So have a look at your risk appetite. So what determines risk appetite? One principle is you will not have high return without risk in place. Younger people then therefore take calculated risks to build their corpus to beat inflation, otherwise the corpus will not grow at a higher rate. And only equity is a class of asset which has given high returns in the past. However, in case you do not have time to actually monitor your investments, it is always better to go for the mutual fund route, which has its own flip side again, but it is still better than direct exposure to equity in case you do not understand the markets that well or you do not have time to actually churn your investments and so forth. There are various models which are available to assess your individual risk profile. On a conservative basis, at the age of 30 years, you should at least put 40% into risky assets, which is equity, mutual fund and so forth. And the remaining should be into debt, which is risk-free. No matter what, do not invest more than 65% of your total investments into risky assets, as once risk appetite will reduce with the passage of time. One would imagine that for every 10 years down the line, your equity exposure should reduce by 10%. So at the age of 60, only 10% of your investment should be into equity. Investment in mutual fund should be made in the mutual fund in a diversified manner, not necessarily lump sum, because if you are not able to time that correctly, invest in a mutual fund which has got, let's say, a Birla Sun Life 100, which invests into the top 100 frontline equity scheme that invests into the top 100 stocks in the market. There could be sector specific. So I have a neighbor who's always very bullish on the banking sector, so he will invest in a sector specific mutual fund. Look at three aspects: safety, security and liquidity. How easy it is for me to redeem. You had a lot of crisis with debt mutual funds in the recent past related to Taurus mutual fund. So then, in case you really want money and the fund defaults, it's not a good idea. Always preferable to invest in listed instruments in their demat form, and the portfolio should not get too long because then you will not be able to monitor. So you should not put a 1000 rupees per month SIP into 30 mutual funds per month. Becomes very difficult. Rather put 5,000 rupees per month into 6 mutual funds as compared to 1,000 to 30 mutual funds, so that you can at least review performance of your portfolio. And then review performance should not happen that you started an SIP into a mutual fund and then for the next 10 years you're not looking at it. And what can happen in the middle is that the fund manager has changed, the investment philosophy of the fund has changed, and you are caught clueless. That is something that should not happen. Should have a equity and debt mix through the same mutual house, so that the shifting from liquid to equity and the other way around can happen easily, depending on perception. So now the markets are very high. The idea should be to redeem your equity investments and put that money into debt. So from a Kotak equity fund, you put it into Kotak liquid scheme, and then once the markets again crash, you move from debt to equity. So that kind of shifting basis the prices and the volatility in the market should be a good bet for someone. What are the kind of mutual funds which are there? There are large caps, mid cap, small cap, sectoral, tax spanning, and theme based mutual funds. Debt funds will have liquid funds, liquid plus funds, gilt funds, MIPs, floating rate funds, and capital protection funds. So for starters, I think one should look at large caps and liquid funds. That would be my bet on this whole thing. These rankings keep changing. So the rankings will vary basis returns in the last 1 year, basis returns in the last 3 years, basis returns in the last 5 years. You should know the alpha and beta of mutual funds. So now let's have a look at this. This is something that is interesting. You have a standard deviation which measures the volatility of returns from a mutual fund scheme over a particular period, which is the up and down in the whole thing in the layman's language. So how much your returns can deviate from the historical mean. So you might have a fund which has given a historical return of 12% and has got a standard deviation of 4%. So returns will then vary in the range of 8 to 16%. Now Sharpe ratio will measure how much is the fund's performance vis-a-vis the risk taken by it. It is the excess return over risk-free return. So what is the incremental return that I have earned with respect to government bonds divided by the standard deviation? This is the risk. So this is like extra return over government bonds divided by the extra risk. Higher the Sharpe ratio, the better the fund has performed in proportion to the risk which it has taken. Now Sharpe ratio therefore is a number that will be available across various online platforms and should be looked at. Look at the performance ranking. There will be some bias in those rankings and one should be smart enough to compare rankings from 2 or 3 websites like say Funds India and Value Research and then come to a conclusion. Look at ratio analysis of what is the allocation and so forth. Look at what is the expense ratio. So for like index funds, the expense ratio is very less. Some funds will charge as much as 3% of your corpus per annum just for the expense ratio to pay the fund manager fee and all. Look at the fund manager's tenure and experience. Often what happens is that you have a Mr. Singhania who is generating return for a Reliance mutual fund. And what if he jumps ships? So the scheme which has historically generated very high returns might cease to generate such incremental returns because the man who was in charge of that, whose expertise was being put at play, has actually left the organization. And what is the scheme asset side? So beyond a point, where will you generate the alpha? So don't go for schemes which have got thousands of crores already in terms of subscription. So then the fund manager becomes at a loss where he will put that money because he cannot sit on cash which will destroy wealth. So that is there. So look at the alpha. So if I have a mutual fund which is linked to a benchmark index and the fund has an alpha of 10%, that means it has outperformed its benchmark by 10% during a specified period. Beta measures the fund's volatility compared to that of the benchmark. The typical beta which is applied to stocks as well. A fund with a beta of 1 will move as much as the benchmark in case the beta is 1.5. So if the market swings by 10% up or down, the NAV of the fund will move by 15% in those respective directions. If you've got a negative beta, that means the market moves up and your stock moves down and vice versa. That can also happen. Expense ratio, just compare. Always the idea should be to consider the expenses charged by them, and lower expenses will benefit you in the longer term. So in case a fund will have a higher asset corpus, it will have a lower expense ratio than that of a small size fund because fixed costs in terms of fund managers, salaries and infrastructure costs will need to be recovered over a smaller corpus. Debt funds will either be a monthly income plan, a capital protection plan, gilt funds which invest in government debt, that is debt issued by the RBI, ultra safe papers because they are backed by the government itself. However, they are not risk free because they are subject to changes in principal value, that is the principal value of the bond, because interest rates keep changing. and therefore a bond which was yielding 8 rupees per annum, 8% coupon, suddenly becomes less attractive when the market rate increases to 10%. So the market will automatically adjust the price of the bond from 100 rupees to 80 rupees so that the 8 rupees that an investor earns on the bond gives him 10% yield on the purchase price. You will have a fixed maturity plan which will have a dedicated fund NAV not moving for the next 15 months or 20 months, and accordingly they take such investment. So I will have a fixed maturity plan of 15 months which invests in a corporate debt of 15 months. So they kind of align the maturity of your investments and the instruments in which they are investing. Liquid fund, very good. So the firm which I run, whatever short-term surplus that we have, we put it in this liquid fund, extremely short, even if it's for a day. It's always better to put that money in the liquid fund rather than the savings account, because savings account they will look at on a daily basis, they will give you only 4% or let's say 6% in case of Yes Bank or Kotak, but there again embargoes are there of thresholds, cutoffs and so forth. There will be floating rate funds which will give you differential returns basis the movement in the underlying debt instruments. Now I will look at NPS in the next segment of our the salient features and benefits of NPS. NPS is a recent initiative by the Government of India, and it helps the subscribers with an option to invest according to their choice and risk appetite amongst three funds. So the three funds, which is basically the three buckets in which your corpus is going to be invested, comprises of A, equity, which is also technically termed as asset class E, then corporate bonds, which is technically termed as asset class C, and then government securities, which is the asset class G. Now the investor will have the option to switch the asset allocation once in a financial year. So you might want to go for the default option, which is contingent upon your age bracket, or you might want to invest up to a maximum of 50% in equity, and this choice can be made for the entire financial year. Therefore, in the next financial year, you can actually make a change in your particular choice. Now, the rise asset mix will be depending on your particular risk appetite. So what I was trying to narrate in the previous slide as well. So one is the active choice, where under this option you can select the asset allocation amongst equity, corporate bonds and government securities as per your choice. And one is the auto choice, where the fraction of funds which are invested across the three asset classes is determined by a predefined portfolio, which is a function of your age. This is also known as life cycle fund option. In my particular case, I have opted for this auto choice. So just left it to the experts to decide what exactly would be the ideal combination of government securities, corporate bonds and equity for me. Now the benefits of NPS is that it's a portable account. The PRAN, which is the permanent retirement account number, remains the same irrespective of whether you are working with the Tatas or Birlas or Reliance. So just keep hopping jobs, but you don't have the hassle of getting money shifted like the PF from one to the other, and even the geography might change. It's an online platform, so you get a login ID and a password and you just access your NSDL details online. You've got a choice of service provider ranging from an SBI to a Kotak to an ICICI. So currently I think there are 6 to 7 fund providers. You've got investment options, fund managers, etc. And you can switch the service provider as well. So for example, currently I have opted for Kotak. I might want to make a move to SBI if I find that they are managing this corpus much better. So that option is also there. So this is like the default option, where let's say if I am in the age bracket of less than 35 years, I put 50% in equity, 30% in corporate bonds, and 20% in government securities. And the moment I cross 55, I have only 10% in equity, only 10% in corporate bonds, and the maximum part of it, 80%, will go to government securities. So now this frequency of contribution can also change as per the subscriber requirements. It's regulated by PFRDA, that's the Pension Fund Regulatory Development Authority. Very transparent, and I've really gone through the details of this. It's very transparent, effective grievance management through the CRA website. In fact, now opening an NPS account is completely offline, online, with just the Aadhaar account required. You don't even have to send that signed form, which was the earlier requirement. And one of the best parts, to my mind, is this extremely low cost of operations. The fund managers have been made to bid at crazily low levels for this particular thing, and even at 0.01% of the fund management fee as compared to 2.5%, 3% that you pay for mutual fund. This is one of the world's lowest cost investment options. And how about the withdrawal? The amount from tier 1 account can be withdrawn only on exit from NPS, because that's where you had the tax benefits also coming. And from the tier 2, you can do at any point of time. The payout will be like, if you withdraw before the age of 60 years, up to 20% of the corpus can be withdrawn in lump sum, and minimum 80% of the corpus needs to be invested in an annuity. So for example, if I were in employment in a particular company and I now decide to go out as an entrepreneur, then I can withdraw lump sum 20%, and 80% of my investment will have to be converted into an annuity. And once I attain the age of 60 years, up to 60% of the corpus can be withdrawn in lump sum, and 40% will have to be converted into an annuity. And the moment I die, the nominee or the legal heir can claim the entire corpus. So that flexibility is there. On exit from NPS, certain portion has been earmarked to be invested in an annuity, and currently there are these 7 insurance companies that are registered with the statutory authority, which is the HDFC Life, Bajaj Alliance, ICICI Prudential, Reliance Life, SBI Life, Star Union, Daiichi, and LIC. Many people will go for LIC as the default option, the bharose wala brand in the country. What are the tax benefits? For salaried individuals, you can invest up to 10% of your salary, which is the basic and DA, under section 80 CCD 1. Remember CCD, Cafe Coffee Day. Within an overall limit of 1.5 lakhs. For self-employed, again, if you are in business, you can still offer NPS. 10% of your gross income can be eligible under section 80 CCD within the overall limit of 1.5 lakhs. And there is an additional investment of 50,000, which is not monthly deductible from your salary or so, but you can make it lump sum. That again will be eligible for benefits of tax deduction. So effectively, this 50,000 that you are investing, you upfront get a 15,000 tax deduction, assuming that you are in the 30% bracket. So whatever earnings that you are doing is on 50,000 as the base amount, but when you calculate your IRR, you are only having to fork out 35,000 rupees effectively in year 0. So the returns magnify to that extent. So this will be the kind of a summary of your NPS investment. There are these online calculators, and if you assume that you are at the age of 35 today, you'll retire at 60. So you have an investment period of 60 minus 35, that is 25 years. And you contribute 2,000 rupees monthly towards NPS, and you expect 8% return on your NPS investment. In that case, you will eventually generate a pension wealth of 18,98,372 on an investment of just how much? 24,000 rupees per annum into 25 is 6 lakh. So you earn kind of 13 lakh rupees, 12,98,000 to be precise, and you also end up saving 30% of this 6 lakh, that's 1,80,000 on tax. and so that's where I end up the NPS story. Now the thing is that there are multiple dilemmas that are there. So for example, today the market is continuously going up. I am happy. So whatever any down Dick and Harry picks up, any down Dick and Harry suggested stock, it goes up. Very happy. Market will be continuously going down, and sometime I am worried, and sometimes it's extremely choppy. I am very confused. So what should I do? The idea is that you should keep on rebalancing. So in case like markets are very volatile and you're not very sure of where they are headed, the best option will be to move from equity into debt for the time being. Sit on cash, and the moment you find reasonable opportunities to enter the market again, do that. But keep a very close eye on the market, because the markets will reward mostly only active investors. So across all the three situations, whether the market are going up or going down or they are in choppy waters, you must have an optimum strategy. Now I think coming to the power of compounding, we are all aware of this. Imagine a snowball as it rolls down the hill, hardens, keeps adding size, picks up pace. By the time it reaches the bottom of the hill, this small snowball has transformed itself into a hard snowball with incredible speed. And you know what? The maximum growth happens when it's closer to the bottom of the hill. That is what happens. So something which has started off very small, keeps getting accumulated, eventually grows to become a huge hard snowball with incredible speed. This is how compounding money works. Because at this part of the cycle, it's very boring, you know. But then the principal fetches interest, but later the interest also starts fetching interest, and that's where the exciting part of the journey, where both your principal and interest start earning interest, and then you'll see a multiplier effect on your portfolio. There are ample examples around us. This is the basic mathematics. The future value will be the present value. That's where saving is important. The more you save, the more you can invest into 1 plus R, that's the rate of return. So higher returns are better, to the power of N. The earlier you start, the more time you give to your investments to get the magic of compounding. So money deposited in PPF account, as I was speaking in the earlier section, gets accumulated over the years, is exempt from taxes, and therefore is one classic example of how it can create humongous quantum of wealth because of this simple concept of compounding. So the benefit of compounding, have a look at this. You invest only rupees 5,000 every month for 20 years. If it grows at a nominal amount of interest of 10% per annum, it goes to 38 lakh 28,000 rupees. And assuming you put it in equity, in a good fund, this small sacrifice from your end, 5,000 rupees per month for 20 years, which is the base amount, will be what? 60,000 and 12 lakhs. 12 lakhs goes to a max of 1 crore 58 lakh rupees. If you put it in PPF at a basic 8%, it's still 12 lakhs goes up into 29 lakhs 64,736. That's the power of compounding, my friends. Check the table to see for yourself. 5 years, you've invested 3 lakhs. What's the value of your investment if you assume 15% per annum? 436,712. What's the multiple? 1.45. 10 years, it goes to 2.2 times. And 15 years, your growth multiple is 3.42 times. That's an amount invested of 9 lakh rupees goes up to a corpus of nearly 31 lakh rupees. 3.42 times. Let compounding work for you. The earlier you start, the lower your monthly savings required to build a specific corpus. So if you start at 30, you need to start with very small quantum. Here it's slightly increases, and finally at the age of 50, if you start to get the same corpus, it becomes a Herculean task. So it's always advisable, start the earliest, because it's 1 plus R to the power N. The larger the N, the larger will be the benefit of compounding. What are the investment success stories? Is it just a fairy tale? No, it is not. It's an immensely disciplined process. So it's built on discipline, patience, research, and strong fundamentals. Don't invest in a stock just because your friend has told that, yeah, aaj pahad ko cooling tower is going to go up 20%, just buy. I mean, he can or she can go right in this, but I think the better way would be to you to actually go through the annual report of the company, see what is its mode, is it valued at the right multiple in the right industry cycle, and so forth. I mean, there's a host of things that you can do. So it's not a fairy tale, but it's rather a very disciplined process. So don't mistake the product salesman for an investment expert. So that guy will have an objective to sell you a particular fund, a particular stock, and by the time you realize your folly, so that HDFC Securities ka salesman, he has a mandate to generate brokerage income, and he will keep suggesting stocks and create churn in your portfolio. Is he an expert? No. By the time you realize that he is not an expert, you're left with nothing. So do not mistake the product salesman for an investment expert. Investments, there are two philosophies to this. You can either do it lump sum in one go. It might not be a great idea because you cannot time the market well. So for example, today you invest in Nifty, it's like 9500 plus, and then Nifty crashes to 9200, you'll be left in the lurch. Now the classic question will be, how do I know that this is the bottom? Yes, you cannot know that this is the bottom or this is the peak. So it's always better to invest regularly so that you smoothen out the market volatility. Start in an SIP mode, whether directly into stocks. So you can actually buy, let's say what I do is I buy 50 shares of State Bank of India every month on the first trading day of the month, irrespective of the price. Or you can do it to the SIP mode, depending on your conviction and your investment strategy. But do not invest in lump sum, but rather try to do the same thing in SIP mode. You can attempt to time the market, but you will not. So because generally, let's say you are sitting on cash today and you are thinking of the markets to crash, it will not happen. And in case the market crashes, you will expect it to further crash. That will not happen. The market will bounce back, make a sharp recovery. So for small investors, it's always better to go in a systematic investment plan, whether directly into equity or through the mutual fund. So you really cannot time the market. Even Warren Buffett, I think, will not be able to time the market. Do not go for fear-driven investment decisions, because this is the typical cycle of an investor. At the peak of the market, greed sets in, he buys. When it crashes, fear sets in, he sells. And repeatedly, this whole thing is done and he becomes broke in the fashion. So decision making is dominated by fear. In an unresearched investment decision, suddenly when your friend says buy Dana Bank, you buy. When it crashes 20%, you say, boss, what happened? And he just washes his hands off. You sell. And you just keep repeating this cycle and you're doomed. And once bitten, twice shy. So you might become risk averse by a wrong trade in the transaction in the market. Do not do that. So you will have your own share of mistakes in the market, but continue investing, because that's where, you will average on the successes and failures, and eventually the idea is to build up a corpus. The idea is winning the war, not every battle, if you go at a classic thing. So long-term investments will work on two basic pillars. One, the decision quality, where the power of compounding needs to be put to play, and the well-researched decision will need to be at the base of your thing. And then the time. It's very important to give your investments time to generate returns for you. Look at any classic share, MRF Tires, Eicher Motors, and Infosys of Wipro, TCS, HUL, ITC, any TAM stock. Just give it some time, 10 years, 15 years, you see the magic it creates. So the quality of your decision, if you are not good enough, rely on some expert. Do not rely on someone in the auto or bus to give you tips. And go to your office and just buy. अरे भाई हमारे अभी 200 हिंडाल्को ले लीजिए ना, बस में सुने थे बहुत अच्छा लग रहा है. That should not be the philosophy. So that's the nuts and bolts of the thing, and eventually the market is going to be your best teacher to teach you this whole thing. So what's the future ahead? Invest patiently in a disciplined manner based on sound research, and look at the host of investment options that you have, ranging from a PPF to an NPS to equity mutual fund to debt mutual fund, liquid mutual fund, then direct exposure to stocks, insurance, medical, or life, or property. So we've covered a lot of things. I think at the end of this session, you will at least become a bit more convinced about your investment strategy. And the greatest waste in the world is the difference between what we are and what we could have become. So if there is this potential of for you to start early and give compounding the time to create magic, realize your potential. Else life has its own share of regrets. Let not your investment strategy become yet another source for you to regret. Thank you so much.